Hello guys, in this video let's try to understand Azure networking concepts with an example of housing society. So let's assume this is our housing society. So this is housing society and this is wall compound. And obviously within this housing society there will be buildings or towers. So let's say this is building 1, let's say this is building 2, let's say this is building 3 and this is building 4. So building 1, building 2, building 3, building 4, and again this is a building or tower. And within each building there will be flats or apartments. So let's say in this building 1, this is flat number 101. Let's say this is flat number 102. Then flat number, let's say 401, and like that. So this is a flat or apartment. So I will say this is apartment. Now for this housing society, let's say this is main gate. Okay. And let's say this is a watchman who sits at this main gate. So this is watchman, main gate watchman. Now let's imagine a guest comes in and he wants to enter this housing society, right? So he will try to enter from this main gate. So what this main gate watchman do? So what are his responsibilities? So this main gate watchman, first he will check ID card, let's say driving license, then, and let's assume this guest, he wants to visit this flat number 101, and let's say Mr. Harshal Jain lives in this flat 101. So what this watchman he will do is, first of course he will check the ID card. Second, this watchman he will call Mr. Harshal Jain, that is flat 101, over intercom, and he will check availability, that is whether Mr. Harshal Jain is available or not. So let's say if Mr. Harshal Jain is available, this watchman he will allow the entry to this guest. And let's say if Mr. Harshal Jain is not available in flat 101, then this watchman will tell that okay, Harshal Jain is not available, but Harshal's brother, he lives in building number 2. See guys, this 2, it is building. So Harshal's brother lives in building number 2, let's say in flat number 602. Let's say Harshal's brother lives over here. So the third responsibility is, if flat owner is not available, provide alternative. So alternative. Now let's assume this guest is allowed entry, and now from here he reaches to this building number 1. Okay. So let's say this guest, he has now reached over here. Now for this building 1, we will have another separate watchman. So that is, for each of this building 1, 2, 3 and 4, we will have its separate watchman as well. That means we have an additional security check. So let's say this is also another gate for this building, and here also we have another watchman. So I will say this is building watchman. Now this building watchman, let's say he has been instructed that if a food delivery boy comes in as a guest, he should not be allowed. So let's say his responsibility is not allowed. And second, if the guest is, let's say, a postman who is working for government, that is, he is a government employee, then he should be allowed. So obviously he will check government issued ID card for this guest. See guys, here also we check the ID card, but let's say this was just a driving license, so this was just a generic check. But here we are having more specific check, that is we are checking an ID card issued by the government. So let's say if government postman, he is allowed. So guys, that is the overall structure of a housing society. Okay, and now let's try to correlate these terms with the components from Azure Networking. Okay, so first we have this black box, that is housing society, right? So similar box in Azure Networking, that will be our VNET. So I will say this is VNET, right? And guys, this black border, right? So it was wall compound. So it provided the security, first level of security to our housing society, right? So similarly, in Azure Networking, we will have something called firewall. Now guys, you remember when this guest tried to enter, this main gate watchman, he performed certain duties, that is he checked the ID, he checked the availability of the owner, and then he provided the alternative. So similarly, when a request tries to enter our VNet, okay, so you see someone is trying to access and resource within this VNet. So here we will have something called application gateway or load balancer. So let's say this is application gateway. So generally we will use application gateway for web-based application, but otherwise we can use load balancer. Okay, but for as of now, let's imagine it is application gateway only. So what will be the responsibilities of this application gateway? So first, of course, provide security. So similar to the guard who was taking IDs for us, right? Then check availability. So guys, what happens is this application gateway or any resource within Azure, it directly does not reside in a VNet, but it resides in a subnet of that VNet. So this you can see this is application gateway. So this application gateway, it will also be present its own subnet. Okay, so let's say this is a subnet for this application gateway, and we can have another subnet. So this is a subnet, and this is also a subnet. So this subnet, it corresponds to the building in a housing society. Okay, and let's assume this subnet contains multiple VMs. And let's say these VMs, they are acting as web server. So when a request comes in our VNet through application gateway, so first it provided the security, right? Now this request indirectly wants to access this web server which is hosted in this subnet, that is its VM, right? So this gateway, it check whether that okay, this request needs to be redirected to this VM, but whether that VM is available or not, and whether that VM is healthy. So it checks if resource which is being accessed, if it's available. Okay, and let's say if this resource is not available, then it will redirect this request to other alternative. So if resource is not available, then it redirects the request to the backup of that resource. Okay, so redirect to alternative. So again guys, here we had this main gate watchman. So that main gate watchman is this application gateway, that is this black box, small black box. Then we had this building. So this building is nothing but a subnet, and you can see this subnet, it contains VMs which are acting as web server. And now let's try to discuss this watchman which we had at individual building, right? So guys, basically any request which tries to access this web server which is hosted on this VM, okay, by default it will be allowed. So let's say if someone tries to bypass this application gateway, okay, so again this is application gateway, and if someone tries to access this web server or this VM directly, it will be allowed. And to restrict that, we have something called NSG. So here on this subnet we can apply something called NSG. So you can consider this NSG as a watchman which we have for individual building. So basically NSG, it contains security rules, and those rules, they decide who should be allowed to connect to that VM and who should not be allowed. See guys, here the role of this building watchman, it was not to allow food delivery guys, but to allow government postman an entry, right? So similarly, we have these NSGs again, which are security rules which decides who should be allowed to connect this VM and who should not. Okay, so in an ideal scenario, if this is an web application, only request from this application gateway, okay, they will be allowed, and any other request which originate other from this application gateway, that will not be allowed. So that's it guys, as far as this video is concerned. We just wanted to understand these concepts, that is VNET, firewall, subnet, application gateway, NSG, that is network security group, and resources at high level. So that's it. Thanks for listening.